Okay, I'm back. Just kind of threw on a motor. Again, whenever you do motors, for those that are new, you want to make sure that you don't get any type of poking up in there, because if you touch one of those coils, you are pretty much going to fry and possibly cause a fire as you short out the motor. How the plan is going to go is I'm going to take a measurement once I got all of the motors on there, and then I'm going to have the race wire laying on there, and after they're soldered on there, they'll go into there. You can see that the stacks fit really nicely, and let me real quick show you how the top plate goes on. So that is going to be a flush fit. So the battery strap will probably be from this one, and yeah, I think that's I might even be able to push the other battery strap maybe through the bottom part right there, between the flight controller and the stack. So that's it for right now. Get a little bit more work done, and then I'll let you know.
For the next part of the video, I'm going to be kind of doing some voiceovers with some pics in there, just because there's some things I need to explain and I don't work the fastest when I was under the camera. So right here we have the frame, and you can see I have the standoffs and then electrical tape just so we don't short anything out. The next part is getting the 4-in-1 ESC connected to the XT60 battery leads. I generally will measure the length that I need to cut. Once I do the cut, I then will put the 3D part on there, as well as if I'm going to connect a heat shrink, I'm going to have to push that up as close to the part as the XT60 connections. You then make the solder of the regular leads and then the capacitor. You want to get the capacitor fairly close to the 4-in-1, and then afterwards you're going to then use the heat shrink to make sure that nothing is connected and nothing is shorted to the frame. You just want to make it kind of nice and clean and neat. If you forget to do the heat shrink, you're gonna have to pretty much unsolder it, and it's kind of a pain, so it's a little bit of a preparation step. This next part is going to be the motor prep, and so once I figured out where I wanted the motors and the race wire to fit, I then measured where I needed to cut them. And then after I cut them, I think it ended up being 15 centimeters from where the heat shrink came off of the motors. I did that because I didn't want to make it too stiff, but then I wanted to make it uniform for swapping it out. Watching some other racers that use this technique, they like to keep it all uniform, so just for easy swapping. Then I tinned up the leads on each of the motor pigtails, and we'll go on to the next step. So this is the soldering of the motors. I used a little bit of electrical tape to hold the race wire into place. I then just soldered up the motors, and I made sure that I tinned them and used flux on each of the pads, and then just one by one soldered up all of the race wires. And then once all the race wires were all soldered up, I then pre-tinned the other side of the leads as well as the ESC pads, and cut off I used the extra race wire, or not even race wire, the extra wire from the motors, and just tinned them up and cut them to length to connect to the ESCs. I wanted to make sure that I was paying attention to the bend radius, which when you're dealing with wires, you don't want to bend it too much, because if you bend a wire too much, you increase the resistance of it, and that can create a hot point, and that can essentially either start a fire or disassemble your solder. So that's kind of what I was looking for in this step, and then I'll show you the overview of how all the 4 of them came over. And then once I did that, I then used the VHB tape, the double sticky tape, once I had them all positioned and aligned them correctly, and that's how this step looks. So with the soldering done, all I had to do is use the VHB double sticky tape, put the motors into place, and I wanted to give a little bit of extra room just in case anything wiggles and everything like that. It doesn't get transmitted directly onto the solder joint, which could cause it to break. You want to use the wires, which are flexibles, to absorb that energy. Then you just connect the wires, which, remember, the ESC part of the wire goes into the ESC, and the one that says flight controller or FC goes into the flight controller. Then with this stack, there's a cable that you just kind of twist up to shorten it up, and they do have a long and a short one, just to goes into the DGI unit. Now, it fit really flush against the standoffs that went to the 3D part for the antenna. Sometimes people put a little bit of a glue or putty just to make sure those antennas don't break off, which is something that is known, but I didn't see a problem with them. They felt really flush, and it didn't feel like my Marmot, where I actually use a little bit of electrical tape or grip tape in the back. So once I finished everything up, threw them to zip ties, then I also used some of the Carpenter felt pads and kind of cut them to each arm, and this is what it looks like. Now let's go on for the test flight and day after the flight.